Good afternoon or good morning. We're still in the morning. I've been interviewing, so time seemed to go quicker than I thought. Good morning, everyone. This is Bassam Haddad. I'm the director of the Middle East and Islamic Studies program at George Mason University. And joining me today is the fantastic Sumaiya Hamdani. Professor Sumaiya Hamdani is a very insightful and empowering figure in our Middle East and Islamic Studies program in more ways than I can count. And I am thrilled to have her join us today. How are you, Sumaya?
I'm fine, and I'm blown away by all this flattery. Thank you for
Yeah, I mean, look, you're a core professor at the Middle East and Islamic Studies program, and I am excited to have. Well, I've met you before 2007 when I joined George Mason, and I was really glad that we're going to work together. And after 14 years, going on 15, this has been a great run, and
not
we're
talking
excited.
about how many years have passed. Okay.
I I know. It's it's gonna happen to everybody. So
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we have this opportunity because we haven't done this, and maybe it's a mixed blessing, COVID that is, that allows us to do these things quicker online and feature our professors at the program. And this is to feature you and your work and your thoughts and your teaching. So we're very happy to do this, and I will be asking you questions about your work here at George Mason and beyond. But I'll start with reading a little bit about you. So there we go. Dr. Hamdani received her BA from Georgetown University and MA and PhD from Princeton University in the field of Islamic history. Her book, Between Revolution and State: The Construction of Fatimid Legitimacy, examines the development of legal and historical literature by the Ismaili Shi'i Fatimid state. Her research has also included articles and reviews in the fields of Shi'i thought, Islamic history, and women in Islam. Her teaching interests include Islamic, Middle East, and world history. Her current research examines the construction of identity in Muslim minority communities in South Asia during the colonial and post colonial periods. Dr. Hamdani has served on advisory boards of the Middle East Studies Association, the American Institute of Yemeni Studies, and the North American Association of Islamic and Muslim Studies, among others. She also founded and was director of the Islamic Studies program at George Mason University from 2003 to 2008. Thank you again, Sumaya, for joining us. I'm going to start with asking a very simple question about how has it been during COVID for you and your family and the home situation.
So it's been challenging. COVID has been challenging, of course, for many people on many levels. Personally, of course, there were challenges. The sense of isolation has not been, easy, or the fact of isolation has not been easy. But one silver lining to all of this has been that, as you said, we can Zoom. And, as a result, we can see people that we want to see and we can have conversations and intellectual exchange without having to physically kind of remove ourselves from the comfort of our homes. So that's been a good thing. That's been a good thing.
Awesome, awesome. If we could, yeah, I mean, same here, and we've exchanged notes about this, so we're on the same boat. Hopefully, that boat will sail or dock, whatever it does, just
Yeah.
not stay where it is.
Yeah.
All right. So, Sumaya, this is again conversational. It's casual. So feel free to share any thing you'd like, including anecdotes. But first, I'd like to ask you about your research and your work. What do you do before we get to the teaching? What are you interested in, and where might you be going? Given that the world is changing fast and there's a lot of material that requires our attention. So where are you in that whole research dimension?
So I guess, being a historian, I'll start at the beginning. and provide a little history on how I got into this field and how I've, you know, worked on the projects that I've worked on. Um, so I ended up in graduate school not really sure what I wanted to do, and ended up taking a course with someone who, you know, by way of kind of reading literature, by way of sort of working on my Arabic, which is, you know, always an ongoing struggle for many of us, especially when it comes to reading older materials and classical sources. So I ended up reading something that was a kind of, you know, biographical, but also anecdotal history of the early Fatimids who ruled between 909 and 969 in North Africa. And it was just so much fun. There was a lot of, you know, personal information, there was a lot of chit chat. And it's, as a source, so kind of startled me because, you know, when we tend to think of early Islamic history, we tend to think that things are so serious, and you know, we tend to think that, you know, the source material is limited to things like scriptures, Quran, hadith, legal stuff. But here was a historical source that was biographical and it was anecdotal, and it was fun to read. So I ended up reading it with a professor, and then sort of exploring ways in which it could maybe um, lead me to a dissertation or thesis topic. And as a result of that, I became interested in the Fatimids, um, who are one of the dynasties that ruled North Africa, Egypt, and other parts of the Middle East in the classical or golden period, 9th through the 12th centuries. And, you know, they often don't get a whole lot of airtime. So I was interested in working on them and in trying to understand not only how they came to power, but also why they've been left out of the narrative. Why, generally speaking, when we talk about the classical and medieval periods, we hear about, you know, the Prophet, his successors, the Umayyad dynasty, the Abbasid dynasty, and then military states. But we don't really hear about the Fatimid Caliphate. So I guess my ambition was to not only work on them, but also to kind of write them into the master narrative, to open the master narrative to including states that don't normally fit the sort of trajectory of Sunni historiography, Sunni Muslim historiography, to include them as an example of the experience of classical or medieval Islam. That's how I ended up writing the thesis, which then became my first book. So that's the past. As for the present and future, I guess it comes out of that project, this understanding or effort to understand how divergent discourses and, you know, minoritarian sort of tendencies within Islam often get written out of the narrative, or how they end up surviving if they do. So what I'm going to do, and what I've been working on sort of piecemeal, is to look at how a minority community that survived the fall of the Fatimid Caliphate ended up not only surviving, but transferring or becoming displaced from the center of the Fatimid Empire, which was Egypt, to places like Yemen and India. So my current project is really in looking at how this community has survived in South Asia during the colonial and post-colonial period, what happened to them, and how they continue to kind of maintain their communal identity or their distinctive identity as a minority within the Muslim minority in South Asia.
Wow, and I do know that you are usually or at least we joke around that we look to you to present sort of the counter hegemonic or the counter dominant view when it comes to the study of Islam or Islam itself.
Yemen
Uh,
was generally.
and the Shi'i dimension. This is great, Sumaya. And can you tell us how how do you transfer or how do you interpret your own work in the classroom in the courses you teach? I know from again, I mean, I'm lucky to have really formidable colleagues, where the students that come to me and that I speak with speak about in remarkable terms, and I'd like to know, and people here joining us would like to know, how do you transport, transfer, interpret this research interest and your vast knowledge to the classroom, especially that people come into the classroom not knowing very much, and worse, sometimes knowing things that that are problematic about Islam specifically.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
So that definitely, that sort of desire to see kind of, or to identify and recover and maybe explore alternative, viewpoints or discourses is something that has always informed my teaching and my approach to teaching. So I teach, and I'm supposed to teach. I'm supposed to fulfill a kind of curricular role in the history department, kind of teaching courses on bread and butter courses on the Middle East and on Islamic history if there's student interest in it, and also to kind of teach world history, which is another curricular remit that I've been given. And that's actually great because world history, although it's a bit of a departure from my training and my field and my specialization, allows me to kind of step back and look at things from a bird's eye perspective. And it in a way brings into focus things that are more important, perhaps, and also things that, need to kind of be addressed in the field of Middle Eastern history or Middle East studies. Um, so one of the things that my students get from my classes, obviously because they're history classes, is context, and I think that's really incredibly important and a way to kind of counter the tendency toward orientalist and essentialist kind of understandings or approaches to the Middle East. For many of our students, it's not, they take our classes not so much because they want to specialize in Middle East studies, or they want to go on to pursue graduate degrees in Middle East studies, but they need knowledge that they can apply to other kinds of pursuits and professions in government and policy, in a variety of other important sectors. And those sectors are important because they determine what happens in the region. So I hope that in taking classes with people like me or other colleagues in this program, um, students acquire a sense of context. They acquire ways in which to kind of appreciate not only the complexity of experience in the Islamic world or in the Middle East, but also to understand that there's a lot of ambiguity in that experience, that it can't always be reduced to what does the Quran say about X, Y, and Z. So that's what I see as my first and foremost task, to kind of problematize assumptions and correct misconceptions by using history as a kind of lesson, as a corrective to the kind of essentializations that they've received from, you know, public opinion or received wisdom or conventional approaches to understanding the Middle East. And the other thing that I try to kind of pay attention to, or am concerned to kind of highlight in my courses, um, is sectarianism. Although, as other colleagues have noted, that's a term that is really problematic, right? We don't know. There is no consensus really on what defines a sect. What does sect mean? And certainly when it comes to Islam, it's something that, whatever is the working definition of sectarianism doesn't really apply. So how do we understand difference in Islam? How do we understand the diversity of Muslim experience and the diversity of Islamic discourses? That's something else that I'm really concerned with and hope to kind of explore with students in my courses. Um, you know, in particular, my focus has been on Shiism because that is a branch, if you will, or a kind of version of Islam that tends to be labeled a sect. And, to sort of understand how Shiism uh, evolves from a movement that is about, um, addressing issues of political legitimacy and how it evolves from that into a legal tradition, into a ritual tradition, into, you know, an intellectual tradition that people don't often kind of address in understanding the Islamic past. So that's something that I try to incorporate in my teaching. I also try to incorporate some attention to gender because I think gender gets written out a lot. There are many assumptions
or
about.
or ends up
Sorry?
being parasitic.
Yeah, yeah. There are many assumptions about Islam, but there are even more assumptions about gender, Islam's attitude toward gender, however we may phrase that, right? So I think, um, allowing students to kind of have some exposure to Islamic tradition on the issue of gender is really important because, yes, I mean, Islam, like many other religions, is patriarchal, but as social historians and cultural historians and anthropologists pointed out, there's, again, a lot of nuance to Islam's patriarchy. And there's a lot of um, complexity and depth to the experience of women, for example, and also to the understanding of sexuality in Islam that we don't often hear about. So giving my students primary sources that in many cases are startlingly frank and or radical sounding it's always a pleasure to expose them to sources like that because it really kind of challenges their assumptions, right? And also to give them the excellent research that has been done in social history, which allows us to understand something about the lived experience of women, what economic roles they had, whether they had access to property ownership, how did that impact their role and agency in Muslim societies. All those kinds of things I think are important to incorporate, and I try to do that. And the last thing that I like to incorporate in my teaching is, a kind of exposure to the experience of minorities in Islamic societies or in Muslim societies and in the Islamic world. Um, who are they? What does their kind of minority status consist of? Are they? How do they negotiate the kind of preservation of their identity with the majority Muslim context? That's something else that I like to explore and kind of expose students to in my teaching.
Wow,
Tall order.
a tall order. This is a tall order. Wow. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about the actual, courses that you've been offering, or courses that you might want to offer? And I'm asking this of everyone: courses that you might want to offer given the conditions around us, both in the United States and abroad, definitely in the Middle East and the wider Muslim world. But if there is something that has either enticed you or instigated you uh, to add material, to add a new course, a whole new course, or to incorporate what is going on, not least on questions of race, which, as you well know, are important questions not just in the United States but everywhere in the world, and definitely in the Arab world, the Middle East, the Muslim world, and sometimes even more so because of the on the one hand, there is naturally maybe in some places a heightened conscience regarding those issues, and in other places there's actually a dearth of consciousness towards the issue. And in both cases, it's important for us to sort of address this issue. always, but definitely today. How does this get incorporated in any future courses that you might teach? And I asked myself this question
Mm.
because, do we add, another week or two, or do we add a few other readings, and how to do it in a way that is not like a knee jerk reaction.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent, okay, so all of us are required by our departments to kind of offer certain bread and butter courses that, constitute the basis of our teaching load. But I've always taken opportunities um, to also explore and offer other kinds of courses that are more topical. So, for example, I've offered courses on um, sort of political Islam in history, sort of Islamic revolutions in history, because that is a constant kind of topic of discussion, political Islam. And I've also offered courses that attempt to kind of um, allow for the consideration and a reminder that the Islamic world is not just limited to the Middle East. So I've offered courses on the Islamic Mediterranean, for example, which allowed me to kind of bring in sort of, attention to places like Islamic Spain and, places like Central Asia, places like Anatolia. Sometimes it get left out of discussion of Islamic history, which is oftentimes focused almost always on the region, the geographical region of the Middle East. I've also offered a course on Islam in India, just kind of explore with students the degree to which Islam is constitutive of what India is today. To what extent is Islam not just an episode of interruption and an episode of conquest, as Hindu nationalists, for example, often represented, but something that is, organic and natural to India itself. So we look at not just the Muslim conquerors and the states that they established in India, but we also look at various kinds of knowledge production and cultural production that occurred in India that make India what it is today. Most recently and currently, I'm teaching a course on race and slavery in Islam, which, along with a colleague, Professor Hussein Yilmaz, who I believe you've interviewed already. And my idea in sort of proposing this course and teaching it was not only to kind of be topical given what's been happening of late with the BLM movement here in this country and in other countries, but also with the kind of consciousness raising that has happened around race and also around slavery that actually preceded the BLM movement. So we're teaching a course on race and slavery in Islam by way of exploring what the experience with racism and slavery is in Islam, whether it conforms to what we know about racism and slavery, for example, in the West, or whether it differs, and how and why. And our course kind of reaches back to, time of the prophet and important individuals in the time of the prophet who were slaves or freed slaves, and sort of moves from that chronological moment to exploring slavery in the medieval period, military slavery, like, for example, during the Ottoman Empire, and down to the modern period when we look at whether or not certain kinds of labor exploitation in the Middle East, like the kafala system in the Persian Gulf states and in Lebanon, is another form of slavery, and whether or not that kind of labor exploitation is also, you know, uh, informed by racism in Middle Eastern society, and to what extent it tends to victimize groups, that are from other parts of the world, like South Asia or Southeast Asia. So hopefully that course has been informative to our students, and hopefully it will kind of generate more discussion about race and slavery in the Islamic world, hopefully in a conference next year through the Islamic Studies program. But one thing that I will say has been a kind of disappointment, and that's probably my fault. But a lot of the topical courses that I teach are taught at the kind of upper undergraduate level. But there's no reason why graduate students can't enroll in these courses as and under a kind of independent study rubric or under a graduate topics course rubric, not only by way of satisfying credits, but also by way of availing themselves of opportunities to take a course that may not be entirely dedicated to a graduate cohort of students. Another consequence.
Yeah, that's totally fine. This is actually what we're looking for in this podcast.
Another consequence of the pandemic is the puppy who we got to protect us from the squirrels and the postman that might be outside. Meet Zulfi, our little
Ahlan wa
garden.
sahlan, Sophie.
Sorry about that.
Oh, not at all.
Okay. Don't quite know how to control this guy. He's a very energetic kind of guy and very protective.
That's good. That's good. No, this is actually is a welcome addition to the podcast. That's Sophie.
Zulfi,
Oh,
as
Zulfi.
in
For real. Wow. I'm like Sophie for I thought you were being
as
like
in the
super
short version of Zulfikar,
I
and
thought you were being
that no,
Zulfaqar. Wow. I thought you were
that
being like super like fluid.
that that decision was my daughter's. She wanted the most pretentious and completely pet inappropriate name possible for her puppy. So it's Zulfikar, but we call him Zulfi for short.
He wants to
Okay,
be
Zulfi.
he wants to be in the center. I like that. It's cool.
Yes.
Well, you ignored him for like more than half an hour, so he's like,
I know. I know. He saw a squirrel. Sorry. Okay. Sorry about those interruptions.
did you want to finish what you were saying, or should I move to the last bit?
Last question.
Last bit is first, thank you. All these courses, I mean, I know about these courses, of course, because we feature them, and I'm very excited about your course with Hussein on race, which incorporates race as a central category, and I look forward to more engagement in the future with these issues, especially for our incoming students who are coming in this into a new program within this context and environment. So that would be really productive for them. Um I wanted to ask you finally about any of your activities as a public intellectual, as a speaker, as a someone who has research projects, maybe outside, the curriculum or the classroom, or any activities that you might want to share with us that sort of complement your work in the classroom.
So, one thing I did in the past, in the before times, was to lead a lot of student and faculty tours, study tours of different parts of the Middle East, mostly Egypt, but also Tunisia and Morocco. And that has always been a lot of fun. because not only because you get to go different places and see new things and expose students and faculty to those places and things, but also because again, it helps to kind of counter the sort of assumptions and the image that people have of the region, that it's, monolithic, it's homogenous in culture, that it is, full of very angry people who hate Americans, right? So it's nice to be able to expose them to the variety and also to, give them a sense of like the Middle East as a place that has art, history, culture, fun, food, and to use the occasion as well to kind of allow them to interact with student groups that we meet in the region, or intellectuals and social and political commentators that we meet in the region, so that they get voices from the region, kind of involving them in conversations and discussions about current events and other issues that might be of interest. And another thing that I ended up finding myself kind of um, dragged into quite a bit was, sort of public outreach to um, different kinds of groups, sometimes religious groups like churches, sometimes um, synagogues, sometimes senior citizen groups. Um, Oftentimes, have found myself being asked to kind of come and give a short talk or engage in that kind of outreach. And I found that really uh, satisfying and gratifying to do as well. It's nice to have conversations about things that I study and research, and things that are important with people outside the classroom.
Thank you, Sumaya. This was really wonderful to hear you talk about your research, your teaching, and activities outside the classroom, which I understand has been kind of a restricted area in the past year. But I hope that in the coming year we'll come up with ideas to incorporate what has been happening locally and globally into our programming, given the its importance and given the long-standing neglect. And I'm not talking about absolute neglect, but definitely pervasive neglect of issues of race. I would definitely add class and gender to that. And these are the issues that we've been, I mean, at least many of us have been concerned with from, I mean, way back when in the 1990s when I was a graduate student. Um, but I'm glad that this is an open topic today in a way that it actually was not, as you probably know, in the 1990s. I mean, you were labeled as some sort of like left wing nut or something when you would bring
Yeah.
up issues of the sort regarding, you know, basic conditions or even speech, basically objecting to certain words and vocabulary. All right, well, I just have to tell you that when Zulfaqar, your puppy, joined us, there was a spike in viewership. Maybe we should, can you, I'm not good with dogs, but can
He's
I
the
borrow him?
star.
That was
He's the
awesome.
star.
No, no, I'm not joking. But this is great. If you have any last words for us, so that I kept you more than half an hour. I always keep people more than half an hour, although I say half an hour. Um, can you share with us anything? Is there anything you'd like to share with us as we part ways about the program, about your teaching, about your research, or about the world we're in and the current moment? Any sort of parting words would be great. This is again the Middle East and Islamic Studies podcast. This is the fifth episode. We have now concluded the conversations with our core faculty, and we will be speaking with other faculty, students, alumni, and administrators, as well as hosting lectures on this podcast that will actually appear on our Facebook page, as well as on our URL meis.gmu.edu. That's meis.gmu.edu. And we will also probably have like a separate page where people can just watch the podcast or download them and listen to them by clicking and subscribing. So having said that, and having also emphasized earlier and now the issue of basically having these podcasts attract attention, engagement from professors within George Mason and outside, as well as enrollment. People are eager, as usual, to learn more about the region, about Islam, and we have a robust program in so many ways. But I'll stop here and I'll ask you to share with us any last words you would like to leave us with, and then we'll release you back to Zulfaqar.
I have no last words except to say go MEIS, apply to MEIS, come to Mason. That's it. It's been real, Bassam.
This is great. Does this mean that that we can look forward to? I think
I'm not hearing you, Bassam.
that's great. That's wonderful. And I was saying that, and I actually said I was saying that we've heard from a couple of people overseas uh, who are interested in learning more about the program, which is great. This is the one of the objectives of showcasing what the program is about and what the professors are about, and we will increasingly be moving to a format where the podcast is about the Middle East and the Muslim world topically, even if though it would be peppered by all sorts of discussions and conversations with people connected to it. Okay, well, thank you, Sumaya. Thanks for joining us on pretty short notice and for being as awesome as usual. And we hope to see you in the corridors of the new. I understand that we're moving to a new building, which is apparently really cool. It's a little tight. It's going to be tighter than what we're used to, but maybe that's kind of cool too. Okay. Have a wonderful day and
Thank you,
salam.
Bassam. Thanks for this opportunity. Okay.
Anytime. Anytime. Salam. Bye bye.